Hello everyone, it's Jen from Olde Tinkerer Studio. In this tutorial, we will be learning how to sculpt in Blender 2.83. This is an update to a previous tutorial. So let's get on with the tutorial. Sculpt mode, like edit mode, is used to alter the shape of a model. Sculpt mode uses a different workflow from edit mode in that an area of the model is altered using a brush rather than altering the individual vertices, edges, and faces. It is highly recommended to use a drawing tablet if you're planning on doing any sculpting. Delete the cube and add a UV sphere. In the sculpting workspace, you'll notice that there is a material added to the UV sphere. This material is called a matte cap. You can change the matte cap under the viewport shading dropdown. A matte cap contains light and reflection information that is used to make it easier to see how the sculpting is affecting the mesh. You still have access to the standard views such as orthographic, front, or side view, as well as the zoom, rotate, and pan options. When you hover over the mesh, you will see a small circle that will follow the location of the cursor. On the left is the toolbar, which contains all the sculpting brushes, as well as an annotation option and a mask option. If we twirl open the symmetry option in the draw panel, you'll notice that mirror symmetry for X is automatically turned on. We will leave this on for this tutorial. It is important to remember that to have a detailed sculpt, you will need a dense mesh. If we select the snake hook and pull out a vertex, we notice that it simply stretches the vertex. This is why we need a dense mesh. If we turn on dynamic topology, also known as DynTopo, and then use the same brush, you will notice that the new topology is being made on the fly. This is because dynamic topology adds and removes detail under the brush. The detail size determines the level of detail you will be sculpting. The refine method sets the option for determining what method will be used to alter the topology. Subdivide edges will subdivide the topology to match the given detail. Collapse edges will collapse the edges to fit the detail size when the topology is too dense. And subdivide collapse combines the previous two options. Detailing refers to the detail method used to create dynamic detail on the mesh. Relative detail creates topology based on the number of pixels. Constant detail creates a uniform detail across the entire mesh based on the percentage of a single unit. Brush detail creates topology based on the brush size. And manual detail fills the entire mesh with a uniform detail based on the detail size. Smooth shading toggles whether the faces are smooth or flat shaded. The remesh option automatically rebuilds the geometry of the mesh with a more uniform topology. Remeshing allows you to add or remove the amount of topology of a mesh. Voxel size refers to the amount of detail the remeshed mesh will have. The lower the value, the more dense the topology. Adaptivity reduces the final face count by simplifying geometry. Fixed poles produces less poles where 3, 5, or more edges meet for better topological flow. Smooth normals will apply the smooth normals operator, which will shade the mesh smooth. Preserve volume will preserve the original volume of the mesh. Preserve paint mask reprojects the paint mask onto the new mesh. And preserve face sets reprojects face sets onto the new mesh. If we go into wireframe mode, you can see the density of our mesh. In our case, we will choose 0.07 for the voxel size and smooth normals. Once we click on Remesh, we will see the density of the mesh change. On the right is the Draw panel, which contains all the settings used for the brush and sculpting in general. At the top of the Draw panel, we have the name and icon of the selected brush. The next section contains the brush settings. Radius controls the radius of the brush based on pixels, and the hotkey is F. If you're using a graphics tablet with pressure sensitivity, you can turn on the size pressure option by clicking on the icon next to the slider. Radius unit is divided between view, which measures the brush size relative to the view, and scene, which measures the brush size relative to the scene. Strength refers to how much the brush affects the model. The hotkey is Shift F. Normal radius is the ratio between the brush radius and the radius that is going to be used to sample the normal. Hardness refers to the hardness of the brush, where the brush fall-off starts from the edge of the brush. Auto smooth refers to the amount of smoothing applied to each brush stroke. If you're using a graphics tablet with pressure sensitivity, you can turn on the smooth pressure option by clicking on the icon next to the slider. Normal weight determines how much grab will pull vertices out of a surface while grabbing them. Magnify determines how much the crease brush pinches, and rake is how much grab will follow the cursor rotation. The remaining options will be covered in future videos. The draw brush moves vertices inward or outward. The draw sharp brush deforms the mesh using a fall-off. The clay brush is similar to the draw brush, while also allowing you to adjust the plane on which the brush acts. The clay strips brush is similar to the clay brush, but it uses a cube to define the brush area. The clay thumb brush simulates deforming clay with your fingers. The layer brush is similar to the draw brush, except the displacement is capped. The brush intersects itself instead of drawing on top of itself. The inflate brush inflates the vertices. The blob brush pushes the mesh inward or outward into a spherical shape. The crease brush makes sharp indents or ridges. The smooth brush smooths out vertices. This brush can be accessed by using the Shift key when any other brush is selected. The flatten brush pulls vertices toward an area plane and flattens the vertices. The fill brush will fill the topology and flatten the area upward depending upon the topology. The scrape brush flattens the topology by pulling the vertices upward. The multi-plane scrape brush scrapes the mesh with two angled planes, which produces a sharp edge. The pinch brush pulls vertices towards the center of the brush. The grab brush drags a group of vertices around the mesh. The elastic deform brush simulates deformations like grabbing and twisting elastic objects. The snake hook brush pulls the vertices along the movement of the brush. The thumb brush flattens the mesh under the brush while also moving the vertices along the direction of the brush stroke. The pose brush is used to pose a model by simulating an armature-like deformation. The nudge brush moves vertices in the direction of the brush stroke. The rotate brush rotates vertices based upon the movement of the cursor. The side relax brush slides the topology in the direction of the brush stroke without changing the geometry. The cloth brush simulates cloth physics on the mesh. The simplify brush allows you to lower the topology of an area on the mesh. The mask brush allows you to mask out portions of the mesh, so it won't be affected by another brush. If you use Ctrl-I, you will invert the mask, and Alt-M will clear a mask. The Draw Face Sets brush draws a new face set, which controls the visibility state of the mesh. I'll be doing a separate tutorial on face sets. The Box Mask allows you to use a box selection to add a mask to the mesh. The Lasso Mask allows you to use a lasso selection to add a mask to the mesh. The Box Hide allows you to use a box selection to hide portions of the mesh. The Mesh Filter applies a deformation to all the vertices in the mesh at the same time. I would highly recommend that you experiment with these brushes to become more familiar with the brushes. If you have a request for a tutorial or a question about Blender, feel free to leave a comment. If you're interested in learning more about 3D art and animation, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.